I'd like to highlight a study that I find particularly interesting and that I think you will find particularly interesting and useful. The title of this study is Brief Aerobic Exercise Immediately Enhances Visual Attentional Control and Perceptual Speed, Testing the Mediating Role of Feelings of Energy. Now, the reason I like this study is, first of all, it's a fairly large size sample group. They looked at 101 students. These were college-age students, and they had two groups. One group did 15 minutes of jogging at moderate intensity. So when they did measure percent heart rates, etc., but this would be analogous to zone 2 cardio, which I've discussed on this podcast before. Zone 2 cardio is cardiovascular exercise that places you at a level where you can hold a conversation with a little bit of strain, meaning that you can get the words out, but every once in a while you have to catch your breath. Whereas if you were to push any harder by any mechanism, going faster or on a steeper incline, etc., that you would have a hard time carrying out a conversation. So zone 2 cardio is a common form of describing that level of intensity that they call moderate intensity. So one group did 15 minutes of jogging at moderate intensity, which I'm translating to roughly zone 2 cardio. The other group did 15 minutes of relaxation concentration that is somewhat akin to mindfulness meditation. And then they were analyzed for perceptual speed, visual attentional control, something called working memory, which is your ability to keep certain batches of information online. Just imagine someone telling you their phone number and you have to remember that sequence of numbers in your head for some period of time. That's working memory. And it depends very heavily on the so-called prefrontal cortical networks, which are involved in planning and action. And they also looked at people's feelings of energy, and they measured that subjectively, how energetic people felt. Now, the major takeaways from this study that I'd like to emphasize are that the 15 minutes of jogging group experienced elevated levels of energy for some period of time after they ceased the exercise, whereas the group that did mindfulness meditation actually reported feeling more calm and having less overall energy. Now, that's very subjective, and indeed they used subjective measures to analyze energy. But what gets interesting is when they looked at performance on these various cognitive tasks. And the two tasks that they used were called the trail-making tests. They have different versions of this, version A, version B. I don't want to go into too much detail. But version A essentially involves having a page of numbers that are distributed somewhat randomly, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on, but distributed randomly across the page, and people have to use visual search to circle those numbers in sequence. So this involves visual attention, it involves some motor skills, it involves a number of things that certainly require energy and focus. The second test was the trail-making test part B, as I mentioned earlier, and this involved also circling numbers in sequence, but interspersed between those numbers were letters. So rather than just having to circle off numbers in sequence, they actually had to connect 1, then the letter A, then 2, then the letter B, etc. And remember, these are randomly distributed across a page. The major takeaway from the study is that the group that did the 15 minutes of moderate exercise prior to these two tests showed significant decreases in the amount of time required to complete these tests accurately. That is interesting and indeed surprising, at least to me, because there have been many studies looking at the effects of mindfulness meditation on the ability to focus. The key variable in the study turned out to be energy, this feeling, subjectively measured feeling, I should say, of having more energy and thereby the ability to focus, especially in these high cognitive demand tasks. Now, the takeaway from this study for all of us, I think, is pretty straightforward. If you are going to sit down to do some work that requires focus and working memory and cognitive attention, and especially if it's some visual spatial control, meaning you have to search for things on a page, you have to organize things on a page, so this would be writing, arithmetic, basically cognitive work of any kind. 15 minutes of moderate exercise done prior to that work bout could be very beneficial for you.